Hey guys, how you doing today? So, Split, M. Night Shyamalan's latest thriller, is going to be coming out this weekend. I am extremely excited to see the film. It looks really scary, very suspenseful, and I hope it's going to be a great comeback for Shyamalan. But today, I wanted to talk about his second film, Unbreakable. I just rewatched the film last night, and I'm ready to give you guys a level-headed review of it. I've already talked about his first film, The Sixth Sense, and that's the Blu-ray you see right here. And just as a heads up, guys, if you have not seen Unbreakable, this review will contain heavy spoilers, especially on its twist ending. So if you have not seen the film, please watch it and come back to this review. This film is about a man named David Dunn, who is played by Bruce Willis in his second collaboration with M. Night, of course the first one being The Sixth Sense. And in this movie, he is the sole survivor of a brutal train crash, but what's strange about it is that he doesn't have a scratch on him. No bones broken. He is basically unbreakable. And as the story progresses, he receives a letter from this man named Elijah, and when he goes to him, he sits him down and tries to tell him that he is a superhero. Now at first, David thinks this is crazy, but as certain circumstances and sequences of events occur throughout the film, he soon discovers that this might actually be a probability. Before we even see the title to this movie, it opens up to an incredible one-shot take where Samuel L. Jackson's character Elijah is born, and we discover that while giving birth to him, both his arms and legs are broken, indicating to us that he is disabled. And as the scene progresses, we then flash forward to David Dunn, who's sitting on a train. And I know that other people have talked about this before, but it is an incredible shot. But what Knight wisely does is add expositional dialogue that does not feel forced. It feels very natural as David has this conversation with a very pretty girl. We discover that he has a fear of water, which will play a huge role later on throughout the film. He takes off his wedding ring, indicating the relationship with his wife is very rocky. We learn throughout the film that David was actually a star quarterback in football, but when asked about it, he says he doesn't really like it that much. Something else that Knight wisely crafts is the sense that this is like a comic panel. The way David is positioned throughout multiple shots just confirms to us that this is going to be a comic book film. And it is so well realized in this, once again, incredible one-shot take where David is sitting in the hospital and he's being told by this doctor that he is one of the two survivors of the train, but in a few minutes, he'll be the only one. We see his son, Joseph, played by Spencer Treat Clark, run up to him and give him a hug, but it doesn't feel like this father-son bonding hug. We're also introduced to his wife, Audrey, played fantastically by Wright, who, like Joseph, gives David kind of an awkward hug, like they're just completely separated. And like I said, the relationship is rocky. But what I noticed about this scene that I never noticed until I just rewatched it is Joseph is the one that tries to keep them together. And as they walk through the hallway, they just separate. And this is the last time we see them make any kind of physical contact until the conclusion of the film, which I'll talk about later. And also, keep in mind that doors play a very special role in this film as they keep the two of them separated. And this happens frequently throughout the story, but it's also in the sense to create comic book panels, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Following this, we discover that David's day job is actually a security guard at a university stadium, but it makes sense because his job is to protect people, which is of course what he evolves to be as a superhero. We then see a teenaged Elijah through a really nice flashback, having a discussion with his mom that has a really cool shot, and you could call it a gimmick, but I do think that M. Night was really trying to make the most effective shot he could. But something that Night does that a lot of other people don't do is to add great information or exposition throughout these really cool shots to make us even more invested in the scene. And in this particular moment, we learn three things. Elijah is being called Mr. Glass by everybody, and that, of course, is very important to the ending of the film. We get to see his love of comics, but most importantly, the color purple. He's not only wearing it, but that's the color of the package that had the comic book in it. And I find that color to be very interesting, and I want to talk about it for a moment because I think it does serve an importance to understanding who Elijah is. The color purple represents the theme of mischief, and it's revealed at the ending of the film, and of course heavy spoilers, that Elijah is the villain of the film. Now another character that infamously has the color purple is the Joker, a comic book character, and I think that that somehow tied into Elijah's love of comic books because the Joker is a man that is all about chaos. He's a man about mischief, but there's one specific person who is the exact polar opposite of him, yet has connections. Batman. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what Knight was going for, but I do think that there are some connections to those two characters in this film. And the sequence in which Elijah tries to tell David who he believes he really is is amazing. I absolutely love the scene. Of course, the score by James Newton Howard is phenomenal. I actually have a specific line that every time I watch it, I think, this feels like the kind of line that would be in a superhero origin story, and here it is.
The city has seen its share of disasters.
In the following scene, David returns home, and we learn two important things about him. He has a gun, which of course is used later on in the film, but the second thing is that he has a ton of newspaper articles indicating to us that he actually did love playing football, but was actually injured, or so we're led to believe. But what I also love about this scene is that she then appears right afterward, and once again, that doorway just shielding them. I think it is fantastic. She believes that the train crash was actually a second chance to restart the relationship. I think the scene is great because, to everyone's knowledge, it's a miracle that David survived the train crash. I do like the fact that we didn't know Audrey's profession until nearly halfway through the film, when she meets up with Elijah. We discover that she is a physical therapist. Now, I do think that it is a little bit convenient that out of all the people Elijah was assigned to, he got the wife of David Dunn. I felt that that was a little bit convenient, but I do like the way that the scene plays out. And once again, Samuel L. Jackson gives another line that would make complete sense in a superhero origin story.
These are mediocre times, Mrs. Dunn. People are starting to lose hope. It's hard for many to believe there are extraordinary things inside themselves as well as others.
M. Night really loves his one-shot takes in this movie because in the previous scene we get this amazing tracking shot of Elijah and David talking, but Elijah wants to relate David's profession and who he is as a person to a superhero in a comic. He tries to describe to David that superheroes are really an exaggeration of the truth. This then leads to my favorite, not the best, but my favorite scene of the movie, where David starts to lift weights again. I think this scene is awesome with James Newton Howard's incredible score, which is just brilliant in this scene. But I love the fact that Joseph keeps adding more and more weight. He wants to believe that his father is a real superhero, and I think that that's also relatable to a lot of sons, because when we were younger, I'm pretty sure most of us believed that our fathers were actually superheroes. Joseph tries to prove that he is just as powerful as his father is by trying to stop this fight, which leads David to have to go to the school, which is where we realize his fear of water actually comes from. However, Joseph does not believe that his father is vulnerable, and in the very next scene, he attempts to shoot him. I think this scene is heartbreaking because he reveals to Joseph that if he pulls the trigger, he's actually going to literally abandon him.
If you pull that trigger, that bullet is just going to bounce off me, and I'm not going to be hurt. But then I'm going to go upstairs, and I'm going to pack, and I'm going to leave.
And I think saying that to your own child is just devastating. It's then intercut with David and Audrey going out for their first date, starting over again, and once again, my God, does M. Night love his one-shot takes, because here he is doing it again. It's also very important to look at where their hands are. They're not touching each other. There's no physical contact at all. It's great because there's still this physical barrier that they need to push through. So when I talked about Batman and the Joker, those are members of DC Comics, and speaking of DC, here comes a really good Superman reference once David comes home and he gets a voicemail from Elijah telling him,
You have a weakness. Water. It's like your kryptonite.
Once he admits he's never been injured, he wants to try to realize his ability, and he goes to a local station. Now this scene, in my opinion, is also a bit convenient, and I think that's the biggest issue with Unbreakable. There are certain characters that he touches and then he just lets them go. He doesn't do anything. But I think the most convenient is when he just randomly bumps into the Orange Man, who we find out is actually a killer. As I mentioned before, David's kryptonite is actually water. So when he's pushed into the pool and nearly drowns, it's him fighting against his kryptonite. Of course, he gets saved by the kids. And this is really the only action scene in the entire film. I think that's really remarkable because a superhero movie made today has so many explosions and people punching and kicking each other. But in Unbreakable, not only is there only just one action scene, there are no visible explosions throughout this entire film. Now, I'm not a romance fan, but I love the scene where David picks up his wife and takes her upstairs. Once again, I think M. Night was actually really being smart here because they finally rekindled their relationship. So now we come to what, in my very personal opinion, is the best scene in the film. Joseph is pouring orange juice into his glass. He's about to get breakfast when all of a sudden David slides the newspaper to him. He then looks up at David, he looks back at his son, and he just nods. And in that moment, I don't know how to describe it. It is so uplifting, but it's also just nearly tear-jerking. It took me a long time to figure out why I had this feeling, but I think this is why. David is a character that throughout the entire film struggles to find his place in life. And he just now realizes that he has this special ability and he's never embraced it. But now, he has finally done something right. He has finally done what he is supposed to do. And I also love the part where David tries to tell his son to be quiet, not to talk about it, because as of this moment, his son is really the only one that knows his secret identity. Okay guys, so now let's talk about the twist ending or the final scene to this film. We discover that Elijah has been the villain this entire time once he shakes David's hand. We get 3 flashback sequences. And I love it when he turns to David and he says, "Now that we know who you are, I know who I am." Because just like David, Elijah is another character who is struggling to find his place in life. And even though he's revealed to be absolutely crazy, he's someone that we can weirdly sympathize with because he's someone who has osteogenesis imperfecta. And it's something that has plagued him all his life. He was constantly bullied. So it makes a lot of sense how we can surprisingly sympathize with him. Now I will be honest, the first time I saw the twist ending, I hated it. I thought it had absolutely nothing to do with the whole movie. However, upon multiple rewatches, it makes sense because we now realize who Elijah is. And whilst I really like the twist ending, I want to talk about my 2 issues with it. The first one being the flashback sequences, particularly the second and the third one. Because there's an old man who talks to Elijah in a bar and he says,
"If there ever was a fire on floors 1, 2, or 3, everyone in that hotel would be burned alive."
And I think to myself, people don't say those kinds of things to other people. That is movie dialogue. Also, look at the third scene. When he walks off of the train, the conductor says, "Hey, there's nobody allowed on this train." Wouldn't you at least check the train before starting? It's a little bit faulty for me, but I think the worst thing, the very, very end, the last 2 shots where all of a sudden we see this text appear on screen. They got Elijah, now he's in a mental institution for life. I felt like they just abruptly ended the film. It could have been about 5 minutes longer, but I think that's my real big issue with the ending. Apart from that, guys, I really love Unbreakable, and I think every time I watch it, I love it even more. As of right now, The Sixth Sense is still the best movie he's made in my opinion, but Unbreakable is my favorite of his. My real issues with Unbreakable are that I think that there are a couple of convenient scenes that just feel like we need to have this specific thing so that it can move the plot forward. It felt too much of a plot convenience to be not only believable, but for me to feel that it was spontaneous. And of course, the last 2 shots of the movie, I just wasn't a big fan of those. But other than that, there's really not that much to complain with. I think Unbreakable is a very well acted film. It's a meticulously directed film by M. Night Shyamalan. It's also his personal favorite, so I think that's pretty cool. But in the end, guys, I really loved Unbreakable, and I'm going to give this film an A. So guys, what are your thoughts about Unbreakable? I would love to hear all those comments, so send them in that comment section below. And guys, thank you so much for watching my reviews as always. This is a movie that I've been wanting to review for a long time, and now I finally am able to do it. And next up is Split. I am very, very excited to see that film. I'm looking forward to it a lot. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Review for Split will be up very soon. Thanks, stay tuned.